Hey everyone, it's Andrew Schiffman.
Harry Turcott here. We both worked at MTV in the music and talent department in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, it was a time where music videos, TRL, The Jersey Shore, and the Osbournes ruled the airwaves.
Yes, Andrew, those are some great years. So tune in every week as we catch up with old MTV coworkers, record label execs, VJs, and artists.
I can't wait, Perry. We'll give you insights into meeting superstars before they were superstars and some juicy secrets from that golden age of MTV.
So grab your headphones and get ready to relive the era of music television and the people who shaped a generation.
We are back. Welcome to the Music Lounge, our Friday hang. But obviously, you can listen to this any day of the week. Perry, how are you today?
Doing well, Andrew. It's been a hectic week. I have been dog sitting for a friend.
Have you been out? It's been bloody cold.
It has been very cold, and it's going to get worse. At least I will be done by this weekend, so I'm
exactly
happy about that.
Yeah.
But I'm even happier today that we have a great guest with us. She is the former senior director of music and talent at MTV and is currently the senior director of program and project management at TuneCore. Welcome, Holly Schomann.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for doing this and taking the time. We appreciate it.
No, it's nice to see you guys. It's been a bit.
It has, definitely.
A little bit, absolutely. Yeah.
And I've been enjoying listening to, some of the stories of, some of your guests. It's been great, remembering and some of those moments. So it's been a nice listen.
Very
Thank
nice.
you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. So let's kind of jump right into it. We and the collective, Andrew and I, mostly know you as the MTV2 guru. And I think even at that time, we referred to it as M2, not even MTV2. So let's start with your music journey. Were you working the music business prior to starting at MTV? And when you did get to MTV, what was your role there and how did you end up working at MTV2?
Yeah, no, this is great. So in college, I worked at the college radio station. I was program director, and at night I also had a part-time job at a commercial radio station in Albany where I went to school. And I loved music. I was so happy to be involved in radio. But for some reason it never really occurred to me that this could be a career. I have no idea why. But I remember very distinctly this moment where I was watching the Video Music Awards and they were showing snippets of upcoming videos of huge stars, Pearl Jam, Madonna, promoing that these huge videos were getting released coming that fall. And I had this epiphany because I was thinking, okay, well, I'm working at the commercial radio station in Albany, New York, which is like market number 70 at the time. And we're influencing the music listening habits of people in Albany. But MTV, which I always watched, is influencing the nation's music, listening habits. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the person who decides what gets played on MTV. And from that moment on, I was on a mission. So after college, as I was trying to prepare and find a job after I graduated, I tried to get into the music department at MTV and was unsuccessful. I ended up getting a job as a temp at Viacom.
What were
So at least,
the steps of trying to get into the music department?
oh, this is kind of
Did
embarrassing.
You know people or?
No, this is actually really embarrassing. So I was first trying to get an internship, to be honest. And even though I had found this loophole that I could pay my college for one course credit because you needed to, get credit for insurance purposes.
Right.
So I could pay for one course credit and I could be an intern. And so
Had you already graduated?
Even though after graduation,
Gotcha.
exactly. I was like, it'll at least get me in the building.
Right.
And there was this woman who at the college radio station that I worked at had interned at MTV. And so she gave me the idea. And so I applied and and I was working at, the commercial radio station, and Ed Levine, who owned several stations in upstate New York at the time, was like, he's like an old radio promo guy. You got to send them a cake. And so I literally sent to MTV a cake with like my name on it, trying to get this internship.
Genius.
And I then had an interview with John Kennelly, who was like
So
the head of the
instead of
department at that time.
happy
Wow.
birthday, it was higher Holly.
So it was the folks at the radio station helped me figure out what to write on it. And it was when that what was that animated movie with Jessica Rabbit? Um
Oh, Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Yes, and it
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
around that time, and I think that someone's name in the movie was Holly, and, like, something about being cool, hire Holly or I don't know what, and so I ended up getting an interview with John Kennelly for an internship that I was going to to pay to do, and I didn't get it.
Mm.
And the folks at Viacom HR who I had been working with, they had been helping me try to get the interviews and help me get the internship, felt so bad that they gave me an internship. So I was a temp at Viacom working for HR, paying to be an intern after I graduated.
Oh. So, and I do remember when I started at Viacom, and I started at VH1 before I went to MTV. And at that time, they had a temp pool
Yeah.
where they would hire all of these people, and you weren't guaranteed work every single day,
Yep.
but sometimes you would get put on a desk working for somebody, and that would lead to a full-time position with that person. I mean, I have a friend who started in the temp pool working at Nickelodeon, and has spent the last 30 years of his career working in children's television programming because of that.
And that's exactly right, Perry, and that's exactly what happened to me. I was in the temp pool, temping around Viacom. I ended up getting an assistant position in the new media department, whatever that was back then. And
Digital, right? Something digital.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I was an assistant in that department for a few years. And however, I was so sad because I was like, this is not where I should be.
Right.
So I was always looking to see if I could get into the music and talent department. And to be candid, the music and talent department was the one of the few departments that dealt most closely with music. There were so many departments at MTV that had nothing to do with music. It was
Hmm.
TV. And so I wasn't interested in any of those departments. I was only interested in this one department. And some assistant positions came up again in that department. And so I interviewed with Patty Galuzzi, who was the head of the department at the time, and Stephen Hill. And Stephen Hill had just joined MTV. Obviously, later on, he would go to run BET,
Mhm.
and they were looking for an assistant. So I interviewed with them, and they were taking a long time, and I hadn't heard back. And the department that I was in, the new media department, was offering me a coordinator position. And I was like, "Well, I'm gonna have to take it. Like, I can't be an assistant forever waiting for this opportunity that may never come along." And I basically owe my entire career to Stephen Hill because I happened to be in the elevator one day going to the cafeteria, the lodge, like, to get lunch, and he's like, "Oh, hi, how are you?" I'm like, "Oh, good." And he's like, "Yeah, sorry, we haven't made a decision yet." And I'm like, "Totally understand. I've taken another role. I've had to move on, so I just accepted this coordinator role." And he's like, "Wait, what?" And like he sticks his hand back in the elevator, and I'm like, "Yeah, I accepted another role." He's like, "Oh no." And so then he goes back and talks to Patty, and within like a day later, they ended up offering me the job. So I owe
Wow.
everything to Stephen Hill. I would be working in new media or something. I don't know what I'd be doing.
Excellent. Hi, Stephen.
Yeah. I mean, it's just being in the building helps for things like that.
when you got to the music and talent team, your focus was on MTV2? Was that straight away pretty much?
No, no,
No?
actually, so initially I was Patty and Steven's assistant. So I spent another, 2 years as their assistant, learning a ton, still having an amazing time because I'm where I wanted to be. I saw the inner workings of the industry,
Mhm.
meeting tons of label people, artists coming in. So I was an assistant toiling away, and that's how a lot of people, to Perry's point, that's how a lot of people got the start in their career, and, across the record labels, MTV, it was your way in.
Yep.
And so M2 had launched, and Darcy Fulmer was programming M2. Andy Schoen had brought her in. I think that they had worked at K-Rock together. And so Darcy Fulmer was programming M2, and she was going on maternity leave, and she pushed for me to program M2 while she was out. And again, I owe her my entire career because I would probably still be an assistant otherwise if it wasn't for her. Um, and so she went on maternity leave. So for a few months, I was programming M2, and when she came back for a short time, but then she ended up leaving MTV, and they gave me the job of programming M2 because
Wow.
they didn't have anybody else.
Right.
And honestly, it was just because no one really kind of cared about M2 at the time. So it wasn't like this big thing. It was like, oh, well, yeah, Holly can do this. No one even cared. And the thing that's interesting is, as you know and have spoken about, in the music and programming department, there was like two kind of tracks, right? There was the individuals who did the music programming, and then there were the individuals that did the talent booking of like coordinating artists to come on to do different shows. And although both of those groups were in the music and programming meetings talking about what was getting played, there was two different skill sets and two different tracks. So because no one had time to deal with M2, I just started doing both.
Mhm.
And so no one ever taught me how to book talent, I just started doing it. And
Yeah, same at MTV.com. I mean, we didn't have that distinction. We were programming the music that was on the website, and we were also doing the artist and label relations. So we talked to every single label about every single thing that happened at MTV.com because, again, it wasn't necessarily a priority for anybody.
yeah,
They didn't feel like they needed to have more people doing that because it wasn't something that was as important as what we call the mothership of MTV. And eventually it got there, but it was
yeah.
still in the very early days, it was exactly the same thing.
So
And
MTV2 being that second on-air video network, when I got there, it was pretty established, different demographic, right? It was maybe male or that kind
mhm.
of edgier music, a little older than what MTV played. Did you help to formulate that programming philosophy of the channel? And, how much influence did you have in the direction towards the end of your time at MTV2?
Well, it was interesting because it was actually a slow progression. So initially, Viacom was trying to grab channel space, right? Which is, there was increasing number of channels. Cable was, ruling entertainment. So you were trying to get as many, channels and space on that early, like lower on that dial. So again, they launched it and had no plan, and that was honestly the greatest because as soon as
It was a
I
blank
started
book, an open,
programming,
yeah.
I could do whatever. I would have like a whole
Right.
day of like black and white videos, or I would have blocks of videos that, thought I was so clever that had like some connection, like they were all, related to each other, or there was like one
I
common
used to do
member in all
those on
these
MTV
bands.
Hits. We used to do
Yeah.
playlists and it was collaborations, but I would
Mm,
do this one had a cameo from this artist, but then the next one featured that
exactly.
artist and yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the best time in
Mhm.
terms of like having the most fun. Although eventually it was like, okay, well, MTV is playing less videos. We need to leverage MTV2 for our brand as that we're, this network is still related to music. We still support music. So there was more and more focus on MTV, using the strength of MTV2. And around the time Tom Calderon came in as the head of the department, and Tom is lovely individual, but so smart. Even to this day, I mean, I haven't worked, with Tom in so many years, but even to this day, if I have like a dilemma or a decision, I still think, oh, what would Tom do? He's such a brilliant man, and I learned so much from him. But he came in and was like, okay, well, in order to break some artists, you can't just be free form every day. You have to play artists frequently to support them to break through. And so there was this very clear moment that I remember where we shifted from whatever to like, okay, we're going to have heavy rotation, medium rotation, light rotation. And we picked a few artists that we were like, these are the artists that we're going to stand behind for the next however long. We are going to play these videos. We're going to try and break these artists.
Wasn't that what MTV was doing?
And at that point, MTV was really, because the hours of videos were diminishing,
Right.
it was like there was less space for that, and it was more about the bigger artists and the bigger hits.
Gotcha.
Right. There are a few artists that I remember getting their first MTV exposure on MTV2 through whether it was being scheduled in regular programming or on shows like 120 Minutes. Is there one or a couple of artists that you feel that MTV2 really, by getting behind them, really helped break those artists to the American audience? And when I say that, I do know that there were probably a few British artists that you did that with. And then there was, artists that were in this fringe genre that eventually became huge. Any stories you can share about any of those artists or bands?
Yeah, there's some artists that maybe they didn't break to be huge, but I know we were very supportive early on, like Pete Yorn. That was an artist we supported tremendously. At the Drive-In, that was also like an early artist that we supported. And there's also a few moments that come to mind. David Gray was
Hmm.
was one of that first bunch of artists that we decided to get behind. David Gray was in there. And I remember this moment so clearly. I was at a show at Roseland. I don't remember what show, and I happened to run into Michael McDonald, who I knew because he was Dave Matthews' road manager. And I had worked with Dave and Michael in the VMAs a few years before, and he was at ATO, which was Dave Matthews' new label. And we were chit-chatting, and he hands me this CD. And he's like, "Oh, you should check this artist out." And it was David Gray. And I got home and I listened to it, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And I'm a little bit of like an Anglophile. So being from the UK, this is amazing. And so we played the heck out of Babylon. And I think that was one of the reasons why RCA ended up picking up David Gray from ATO and promoting it. So I think that we did make an impact there.
And I do remember after RCA picked it up that MTV made him buzzworthy and gave him even a bigger exposure through the network. Yeah.
That's amazing that you remember that.
I
I
was
can't
like,
No,
remember.
because
I
well,
I
sorry,
remember
it's
so
not.
little. I'm like,
well,
oh, I can't remember anything.
I remember that only because I will still to this day listen to it was White Ladder was the album,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I remember it was one of the first artists that when I had started at MTV, I had asked for tickets to go see his show, and he played Madison Square Garden. And I was like, "Oh, I shouldn't even be asking for tickets." And then you see every assistant that's in the department there at the show, and I'm like, "Oh, I shouldn't feel bad about asking for tickets to go see things." So, but yes, I do remember the whole progression of David Gray in the MTV ecosystem. One of the few things I do remember.
Yeah. Very
That's
impressive.
good. I'm impressed. I'm impressed
Yeah.
with your memory. Another one was Coldplay, and I think Brandon and Diane Mayer were both on have spoken to you about this. But I went to the UK to meet with the folks in MTV. We were doing some counter programming with Zane Lowe in 120 Minutes. And while I was there, I saw the video for Yellow on the BBC, and I was like, this is a hit. The video was compelling, and I came back, and they were on Parlophone at the time. They hadn't been released, in the US. And when Diane Mayer called, she joined Capitol and she called me on her first day. And I'm like, oh, congratulations. By the way, there's this band called Coldplay on Parlophone, which is also owned by EMI. They're great. You've got to check them out. And Brandon Schmidt was actually the first person who got me the full album
Oh,
of
wow.
Parachutes, because he had those connections with the record store owners in the UK. So even though
Mm-hmm.
the album wasn't out in the US, Brandon was able to get it ahead of time. We had Chris come in to host a bunch of stuff. I remember that, the first time Chris came in or the band came in to host something, they were just so pleasant, and Chris was really dynamic on camera and willing to do anything, and also just had they had this great energy about them. They could make fun of themselves. He was an amazing host. So I said to Dave Holmes, who was managing them at the time, like, we have to have him host everything. Let's get him hosting this, this, and this. And that was the beginning. They did one of the first $2 bills. So that was the
I
beginning.
didn't remember that.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
in
Um,
Chicago.
wow, wow. Brandon was so hot on them from the start and was able to convince the label to bring them in to do a performance in this little like studio we had at 770. Unfortunately, they had to cancel the performance that day. We did do an interview because Chris had some kind of a throat
Mhm.
issue and they were playing at Irving Plaza that night and he had to
I
save
remember
his
that
voice for
show.
the show.
I totally
Yeah,
remember that show.
yeah. So,
Hmm.
Great story.
uh,
You really brought them to the US. I think the exposure that MTV had at that time. Also, radio played a big part back in those days, but really the MTV. And I think on the back end, the labels used MTV, and we looked at the radio chart when we were making certain decisions as well. So, really, our two entities, video and radio, played a massive support. And those probably influenced them getting booked on certain shows and touring and everything else, right? So we really helped spearhead their career. I like to believe.
and also
Hope
I
it was
believe
artists that way.
that MTV2 was really early on the whole emo scene.
Yes, that's right. Perry, I don't know how you remember all this.
I
This is
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. um, what artists do you remember being early on and sort of giving a wider audience?
Yeah, so that's a great story, actually. That Dashboard Confessional was someone that we were very, very supportive of early. And I remember, again, a very distinct moment. I was friends with um the late great Bill Carroll, who was a radio promotion person at heart, but was such a huge music fan. And him and I were friendly, and he ended up saying to me, like, hey, there's this band that I think that you should check out. And it wasn't even on his label. Like, he was not working Dashboard. And I was like, okay. He brought me to Wetlands to see them. And I had
Wow.
never heard of them. I had no idea, didn't know a note, like never heard of the music. And we're standing there and Chris starts singing and the entire venue starts singing every single word of the song. Every single word.
This
And
is like pre-streaming, pre all of that, where you're like, how do these people know this already? And understand this whole grassroots and underground scene that exists that you're so not privy to at
Mhm.
all. And, because at MTV it was felt, sometimes could be a little corporate-y,
Yeah.
I guess. But the fact that this type of an artist and this audience existed, it was like, it's like a light bulb goes off. You're like, we should be on this, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I still get chills, like, just thinking about that moment because to your point, Perry, how often do you walk in to see an artist that you've never heard of and the audience knows every single word? Like,
Right.
it never happens, and I remember just looking at Bill, after 3 seconds of the first song and the whole venue is singing, he's like, "Yeah, I told you," and so we were big supporters of Chris very early on, played the video a lot, and also booked them to do an Unplugged. I think that we were rebooting MTV Unplugged on MTV2. We booked Chris in, that was in the studio, and that was the beginning of a good relationship with them. But we definitely were very, supportive of Dashboard early on.
And I mean, and that genre like blew up, and I mean, it became a staple of not just MTV2, but MTV for a very long time. I
Yeah.
mean, it became a staple of TRL for a long time. And to think that it came from this very underground movement and you were able to tap into that early, I mean, that's awesome.
Bring it to the mainstream.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great time to be in music and yeah, I'm very fortunate. Bill was an amazing music fan, and I owe that all to him.
We're going to take a breather. I'm going to throw some quick fire trivia at
Oh
you that
boy.
we didn't prepare for. I'm going to have to change some things a little bit because you've answered a few questions already.
Okay. Okay, just
Like,
remember that
what
my
was
memory is
Coldplay's first
terrible.
album called? I think you've already
Okay, that one
provided.
I knew. Okay,
Yeah.
and I have it on my wall, so I have a hint there.
All right,
Anyway.
there you go. You worked on 24 Hours of Courtney Love. During that taping, can you name a musical guest that she had live in the studio?
Yeah, the Strokes
There you
and
go.
and
Yep.
Ryan Adams came. Molly Ringwald came. Obviously, she's not a musical artist, but yeah, the Strokes and Ryan.
Strokes were big. Yep. I had also Eve on my list. I also had a couple notes from phone calls. Can you name or think of any people that called in?
No, I probably like blacked
It
this
doesn't
out.
matter.
Maybe I don't. I
Michael
don't
Stipe
remember.
and Cameron Crowe.
Oh, yes, actually, I should remember that because we tried to get footage from one of the movies that Cameron directed, but it was so expensive because Courtney wanted to talk about it and toss to it, but we couldn't afford the rights to get the snippet of the movie. It must have been Almost Famous, and
Yeah, I
and so
think that,
Cameron
yeah,
called.
there was a lot of video footage that she thought that she could throw into the
Yes,
show, but for some reason you didn't have the rights, and so there was a little bit of drama, I think, backstage on that.
yes,
Um,
that was
so
chaotic.
the VMAs from 2001 to 2006, they introduced the MTV2 award.
Oh yeah.
Can you name one winner from those 5 years?
Dashboard Confessional
Boom, good.
and
Yep.
Mudvayne
Yes.
and Yellow Card.
Yellow card, yes.
Well, you've named 3 of 6. Do you want to keep going?
Perry, give me a hint.
Well, I don't have this question in front of me.
So the 3 other ones that I had were AFI,
Mm.
Fall Out Boy, and our friends from 30 Seconds to Mars.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So I'm going to skip over the
Did
Coldplay
I
one.
pass? We consider that I
Yeah,
passed the
100%.
test or did I fail?
All I wanted was 1.
Okay, all right, I did okay. All right, that's good.
So a bonus question on your Coldplay knowledge. What did they call themselves before they came up with the name Coldplay?
Oh, and it's, and actually, I think this has even been a question on Jeopardy, and it's a bad name. It's a really bad name. I don't remember it, but I
All
know
right.
it's
So they
embarrassing.
called themselves right early on Big Fat Noises. And then they went into Starfish, which I think is
Yeah.
the one that most people vaguely remember. MTV VMAs as well had a best rock video category that was won by one female only.
Was it Courtney?
No. The nominees could have been Evanescence, Lord, Paramore, or Florence and the Machine?
Well, Florence probably won something, but I don't know if she'd win Best Rock, so I would guess Evanescence.
Lord
Wow, okay.
from
Alright, well
Royals in 2014. The only female to win that category. Last question. What was the first video to air on M2?
Beck.
Yes?
Yeah, it was Beck. It was
Wow.
And the
yeah.
video?
Was it Where It's At?
Oh, you are a rock star. You
If I didn't
passing
know the
with
answer to that, that
flying
would have been
colors.
that would have been that would have been bad. That would have reflected poorly on me. But were you all at the M2 launch party at the Cooler where Placebo played?
No, I came to MTV in New York. I was in programming in 2002 to 2005, and then I came to the music department at '05. So I think we maybe did a high five on my way in and your
Yeah.
way out. I was very intimidated by you, Holly. You were just someone not to mess with, but I was just very envious of your position, and you had a cool dark office as well.
Well, I remember you working in programming. Distinctly, I remember you.
Well, that was in the middle
And
because the music team overlapped programming and went
yep.
beyond. So we
Yep.
had that whole side of the floor.
Mhm.
When was the launch of M2?
It was I think
M2.
it was like mm,
Yep, go ahead. Bonus
no,
bonus
you
question.
go. Okay. I think we launched it on like August 1st to time with an answer anniversary of
And the year?
MTV, and the year it must have been 96,
Oh,
96,
no, yes, everything.
97? Yeah?
6.
Okay.
August 1st, 1996.
Great.
And what was the time of day
That
did the video
that I
play?
don't remember. That I don't remember.
Oh, man.
But Placebo ended up being one of the first artists that I booked on M2. That record was such a great record. And then they played the launch party at this club called The Cooler, which ended up being extremely ironic because it was August and it was like 3,000 degrees in that club, and I've never sweat so much as in all of my life.
That's fun.
Nice. I have a few brain cells left.
24 Hours with Love was definitely one of the big highlights. Were you involved in the inception of the idea, and how did you get to book Courtney? And anything you want to say? We've heard a little bit about some video content and musical artists, but what was it like?
Yeah, I remember
And
the
what was
moment
how did it happen?
when, this idea came about. So we were in some brainstorming meeting trying to I think of some huge tent pole or stunt weekend programming. And it was Michelle Dix who was the head of the talent department, like the talent side of the music department. She's just very creative. She has like a very creative mind and is behind a lot of the successful shows at MTV. And she just spouted out like 48 hours of love, 48 hours with Courtney Love. So initially it was supposed to be 48 hours of live television with Courtney Love. We barely survived 24, so I'm very glad that it was not 48. But yeah, I think she came
48.
up
Oh
with the
my God.
title
Can you
and then
imagine?
just riffed on it, and so it wasn't that we came up with this concept and then had to find the right artist. It was that Michelle came up with this concept in conjunction with Courtney.
Amazing. And
What if she had said no?
yeah.
I don't think the series would exist, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had an episode with the Foo Fighters too, right?
Yes,
A few
and
years
that
later.
was great. I just think it's interesting that both of the first two artists had to do with, Nirvana and the grunge scene.
I never picked up on that. Yeah, yeah.
It was completely random,
Right.
but we were, much more prepared for the Foo Fighters, having gone through with the 24 hours with Courtney. So Andrew, like you mentioned, we had some videos that she wanted to play, had some things that she wanted to say. We, were thinking it was going to be fairly free form throughout the 24 hours. And after a few hours, we basically had gone through all of our ideas and we were like, what do we do now? We have played all the videos that she's chosen and we started to sweat. And there was some like logistical issues because we couldn't easily pull videos from the video library because it was
Yeah.
closed because it was a weekend and things were really it was difficult. And so some senior executives came down and they were talking in the back like should we try and should we cut this short, we had promoted 24 hours, what would we fill it with? And Alex Coletti, who was producing it, um just started calling people, calling his friends, the Strokes. He knows Ryan. He knew Molly Ringwald was on Broadway, called her,
No
and
doubt.
he just like started reaching out, and we were able to get through the 24 hours. But yeah, we were not quite prepared.
Gotcha.
I honestly forgot about the fact that none of those talent were pre-booked. It was all sort of on the fly
That was
because
all on the fly.
we were doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff for MTV.com. I know that Tim Campbell, who
Mhm.
I worked with closely, was there for a good chunk of it. I came at very late at night just to kind of check in. And I know that at that point, Courtney was, I
Naked.
don't know. I don't want
I
to,
was
I didn't,
just gonna, I
well,
was just gonna say.
I know that is that story is MTV legend at this point, but if you would like to sort of share that, Holly, we'd be happy to hear it because we had another guest who tried to share it, but was very PG in his sort of description of what happened.
Honestly, I wasn't in the room. I think I was probably heads down trying to get some videos pulled for her, so I didn't witness this, but at some point she was partially naked and like yelling at people. That's basically all I know.
Enough said.
So, you know,
Yeah, it wasn't exactly what you thought it was going to be, but it turned out probably even better because of that. It was stuff that you could never imagine that would have happened in a live show anywhere else, really. And she was a unique character to base that around.
yeah,
So,
exactly. And that's why, I can't speak for Michelle Dix, but I think that's why she came up with the concept because of who Courtney is.
right.
The thing that people don't understand about Courtney is that she's very, very smart. She's brilliant and she uses that to get what she wants and get her way. And sometimes I think that means that she has to be half naked yelling at people. So she will do whatever she needs to get what she wants.
You had that great run at MTV and MTV2, and then I believe, did you go to a record label right after that?
Yeah, so after MTV, I went to do A&R at Warner Brothers for a few years. Um, I signed the honorary title to Warner Brothers. They were on a smaller label, but it was the beginning of the labels really beginning to downsize.
Yeah,
So I bopped around a little bit. I was at SiriusXM booking talent, which was also fun. I got to meet so many amazing artists, and I was at Vivo, where Perry, I worked with you at
yeah,
Vivo. And,
absolutely.
and then after that, I was thinking, that the industry was shrinking, and I just started thinking about how am I going to begin, how am I going to have some longevity and what's the next step of my career? And I was able to use my organization skills and my attention to detail to transfer to a role as a role as a project manager in the technology space. And as much as it, was so sad for me to leave the music industry, because it's what I obviously always wanted. I just felt it was necessary to prove my adaptability and continue to evolve. And if I can organize things around Courtney Love, I can certainly organize things around software development. And yeah, spent some time at different companies, managing technology projects. And now I'm at TuneCore, which is amazing because it's back in the industry that I love. It's the culture that I love. And even though I'm a little bit more far removed, basically TuneCore supports independent artists and is
Right.
helping independent artists get their music out there. And that's ultimately what I always wanted to do. I always wanted to help musicians get their music out. And now I'm just doing that from like a farther distance.
Well, it's also a very different way of getting their music out there too than
Yes.
what you were doing when you were at MTV or even Vivo. At that time, it was still the very early stages of, streaming.
Yeah.
iTunes was the king of the mountain at that time. There was no Spotify or any of that available. Never mind like a TikTok,
Hmm.
so to speak. And it is a completely in- different period of time for artists who are trying to get heard by an audience. And we've talked about this multiple times in other episodes that when we were at MTV, I feel like it was the peak of MTV's power to influence culture and to influence music. And then MTV2 obviously was able to do that for some genres that were not necessarily super mainstream at the time, but were able to help become mainstream. And it's just interesting to see how the business is done today versus when we were at the place that was the kingmaker of at the time.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in a way I feel like I've seen three kind of iterations of the music industry. Because back when I was in working at the commercial radio station in college, and I was thinking like, oh, we're market number 70, we're influencing what people listen to in Albany. That was before the deregulation of radio stations, where there used to be a law that one company could only own a certain number of radio stations.
Right.
And once and in a way that was one of the reasons why artists were able to develop locally. I mean, Dave Matthews is a great example of
Yep.
him starting in a town and building and building and building, and then expanding. So the time where a DJ in some city would see some local band and then play their music in that local radio station and help that artist develop in that area and then expand. It doesn't happen anymore because there's 3 or 4 companies that own the majority of the radio stations, and they're playing the same thing regardless of where you live. And so
Right.
that
Right.
forced artists to build their careers in different ways. And then to your point, Perry, there was a different methodology for, trying to get an expanded audience, using Spotify. And now there's yet even an additional, different methodology using TikTok and Spotify. And so it's very interesting to watch the industry continue to evolve, and how artists have to adapt to the changing industry.
And it's interesting today, as we're recording this, with the Supreme Court today upheld the ban on TikTok. So we will see in the next couple of weeks what actually happens with TikTok. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's a
absolutely.
shame because it isn't a music platform, right? So for music to be affected and the power and that it has over music is a shame that the industry is going to lose that vehicle, but there's always going to be a follow-up. There's so many artists that I've discovered on Instagram Reels, and
Mhm.
that isn't a music discovery platform. There's always going to be something new. Hopefully it's
right.
less harmful to the youth or
Interesting.
political everything really.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. We greatly appreciate it. great stories, a lot of information I actually didn't know about both your career path and the growth of M2 into MTV2, and the genres of music that you were able to focus on, and the artists you were able to break.
And your
So
knowledge
very
of some trivia. Very impressed.
yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to reminisce, and it was so lovely to see you both. I adore you, and
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed listening to the podcast, and it's brought back some wonderful memories. So, yeah, thank you both. Have a great
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Thanks,
We
Holly. We'll
appreciate
talk
it.
soon. Have
All
a good
right.
one.
Thank you,
Bye.
Holly.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us today in the Music Lounge.
And tune in next week to hear more stories about your favorite era of MTV.